All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to an episode that you chose to watch. But did you choose to watch? There are tram lines everywhere, and we're going to take you down them because Doug and I have come back to talk about a show that is all about the decisions in life that we do or don't have, and whether we think we have free will or we don't. Or do we? How many worlds are there? I don't know. We're going to find out because we're talking about the 2025 Alex Garland series DEVS. And I watched this series back in 2020 when it actually came out because Alex Garland is a really interesting director and I like a lot of his stuff. Even when I don't necessarily love every movie. I'm not the biggest Ex Machina person around. I know a lot of people love that movie. I'm okay on it. But it looked great. And so I watched it and loved it. And I mentioned it to Doug during our Star Trek retrospective. I don't remember which part. And Doug had said he'd never seen it. So I said, well, why don't you watch an episode or two and see if you like it, and then we can talk about it. So he did, we did, and we're going to talk about it now. So I'm welcoming back teaching professor at Northeastern University, Dr. Doug Bielmeier, whose latest available album is Music for Billionaires, which you can purchase anywhere that you can get music of any kind, and a upcoming album that will be out in fall of 2025, which is called, I have to look at my notes, Electric Rodeo Revival, because there's no way I would have done that from memory, and whose podcast, The Process, is in season 6 and can be heard wherever your podcatcher goes and takes things out of the ether. So Doug, welcome back for a very, very interesting show to discuss. How are we doing?
Good. It's gonna get deep, right? I feel like you can't watch this even in the opening episode of this show. You're just like already there's like an alcoholic bum yelling in the air. There's a man looks like he's just torn apart by grief, and then there's the San Francisco landscape. So like right off the bat, and there's Gregorian chant happening. So you're like, all right, this is going to be heavy, which shocks me that you said the first time you watched this was in 2020 during the pandemic. How did you, like, when you started watching it, were you like, I gotta turn this off, or did you just get immersed?
No, what happened was it was heavily promoted. At the time, I think it was one of the biggest promoted things because FX, from what I read, had originally looked to do a pilot episode. So Alex Garland basically made the pilot and they looked at it and said, no, we're going to series immediately. They immediately just greenlit the whole thing. And as I said, I'm a Garland fan in terms of no matter what, I like the visuals and I like the way he uses sound. He has a very specific kind of artistic vision. I don't know what I was trying to say, authorial. I don't even know what word that was. But he has a very specific way he approaches things. And I had read that he was doing every episode. And I went, okay, this is David Lynch, The Return. He did the whole thing. I was coming off that, like drafting off that, where I'm like, if the guy's got control the whole time, I always prefer an artist control the vision beginning to end. And it doesn't happen very often. It's a rarity. And so when I saw that and I saw the trailer and I went, Nick Offerman in a serious role, looking sinister. There's just a lot of really the gold kind of coloring. I love Deus Ex Human Revolution, which is black and gold. It's got a lot of that coloration, so I'm into that. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to watch the first episode. And if I think it's too much to take at this moment, I'll just stop. And it was such a rivet. It's one of the best first episodes of anything I think I've ever watched. When it got to, because the music was used so specifically and intentionally, the visuals are so striking, and I went, okay, no matter what, I have to stick with this because this is just too unique for what's normally on television anymore. So I'm going to stick with it. But I was going back and forth, and every little bit of it hooked me enough that I was kind of, and then once I watched the first episode, I couldn't not watch it. I just had to know what was going on. So that's how it got me. But yeah, it was a dicey time to watch something like this because I really didn't know where it was going. And luckily it was not a complete and utter downer as a bit of a preface. This does not end horribly with everybody dead and exploded. So I'm like, okay, at least it didn't destroy me in the ending, but it is definitely a heavy series for sure.
Yeah. And you're right though. You know, one of the reasons why it could be problematic if you're going through a tough time is because, like you said, the sound is really important and the sound works on you. You know, the emotional things that are going to, be unveiled and revealed throughout the show are tough. And some of the science is like way beyond my, high school science education. But the music really works on you. And, even just listening, I was rewatching today and on the 5.1 system, so I got a nice subwoofer and all that. And they're just using the sound to kind of build tension. And I mean, I know that happens in every movie, right? Or most movies that are well scored, but this in particular, sounds kind of carrying over from one scene to the next and kind of maintaining, buzzings, things maintaining through from scene to scene to kind of keep that tension going. Yeah, if I wasn't in a right place, I mean, this is not something I could watch at late at night, right? Because I just feel like it would just be like too much. I'm like, I got to sit here and take notes and figure out which, theory of determinism I I prescribe to or whatever. And but yeah, it's really fun the way it all kind of works on you. So I think it would be great if I had watched this during the pandemic. I probably would have, just like you, got sucked in because it really is so immersive, and it's probably better to focus on this show than whatever was going on back then.
The irony is I did watch this late at night. The first episode I watched, my wife was actually asleep next to me, and I had like a good pair of headphones on, and I'm watching it. And headphones. When it finished, I just stared at the screen because it ends with such a powerful visual. What happens at the very end of the first episode, I was just stunned, because it's rare when you see something that has that much of a hook as it's ending. And again, with the music and everything, the visuals, it's so striking and so interesting and so different. Still, now, there's still not much like this that I can think of that really wraps all these elements together, but still feels so separated from everything else. I just can't think of another television show like this, even ones that cover the same kind of topics, even ones that use great music, that type of thing. It really feels like a companion piece to a David Lynch, like The Return. This and The Return feel very together, with the way music is very intentionally used in that show, differently, but intentionally. The way sound, like you said, sound is played, and there's specific sound effects. Like Lynch was big on having these really electrical noises all the time and all this stuff in the background to kind of offset everything and make you kind of a little bit unsettled. And I feel like that's in this one too, except that it's done with more with musical cues and then the visuals to accompany it. So it really is it's still, like I said, I rewatching it, I watched the first episode knowing how it ended, knowing exactly where it was. And at one point I went, man, this episode's almost over. And I felt like I just started it because I knew it was coming. And just to lay out for everybody who's watching, the way we're going to do this is we're not going to spoil past the episodes that we're talking about. So we'll talk about the episodes in detail. There will be spoilers in them, but we're not going to jump and reveal everything in case you want to actually watch and come back and kind of see our thoughts on it. So we may talk about things that will be important later. Things like, oh, this is going to be significant later. Like, okay, I didn't think about what this was going to mean, but we won't specifically jump and say, oh yeah, and this ties into the ending when, the Martians land and suddenly invade and kill everybody going, ack, ack, ack. No, we're not going to do that. So we'll stick to the episodes. There'll be spoilers for those episodes, but we will not necessarily cover up things that we think are significant or say, okay, if you watch this is important, or this is an interesting thing to think about when certain things happen later, just so everybody's kind of on the same page. So if you're afraid of spoilers for the ending, we will only spoil the episodes that we're covering, which in this episode will be the first two parts. So it'll be one episode, 2 parts per episode. So we'll do episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, similar to what we did with Star Trek, a pairing for each one. So that's just so everybody knows where it is, because I know spoilers, some people get real sensitive and some people don't care. So if you care, it will only be within the framework of this. So stop if you haven't watched it and intend to. Go watch it, come back. We'll only be talking about the first 2 episodes. So, right off the bat, we get a sensational piece of music, which we didn't think we were going to have access to, but luckily I had it to make the opening. So, let's play that since it really starts it off. And it's, as you pointed out when you're like, no, this is the music I want to hear. It is a beautiful piece of music. So, let's play this, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it, because it is... Again, the music is so fundamental to what makes this series work. So let's listen to, I don't know what it's called because it's not on the official soundtrack anywhere. So I just called it intro.
Theme. Yeah.
So yeah, DEVS theme. Here it is. Just theme. Whatever it's called, we're calling it DEVS theme.
Yeah, I think, this clip starts with the introduction of that soaring, I believe it's a soprano saxophone, or if it's an alto saxophone, it's very high in its register. And it's really quite jarring because the setup is, if we were to play the whole clip, there's almost a minute and a half of just this male choir. And it's not just like men singing, with like bow ties on or whatever. It is definitely plain song or Gregorian chant or something that you might have heard sometime around, 1000 to somewhere like 1500 AD. It might sound medieval to you, or it might sound like Gregorian chant, which I think is probably everybody's sort of reference for it. And so you have about a minute and a half of that. And as we're kind of watching the other visuals, we're getting kind of a lay of the land. This is like the cold open almost in a way, because it's before the DEVS theme comes up. So I think we see like forest, we see San Francisco, we see a drunk bum yelling at the sky. I think we see Pete, a character in the park. We actually see a bunch of people in the park in San Francisco, like just kind of hanging out. And then, of course, we see Forrest, who looks like he's just like a destroyed man. And we don't know who any of these characters are yet at this point, too. We're just like, all right, we're looking at Nick Offerman and being like, he looks kind of broken. But the thing for me, which is so beautiful about this music, is that first minute and a half of Gregorian chant, it's kind of like where music started. And in no way, in a colonialist perspective, is that where music started. But in the Western world or whatever classical tradition, that's when they first started writing music down. So anytime I hear Gregorian chant or plain chant or music from that time period, I'm like, oh, this is the birth of music. And then the part you just played, this like really screeching saxophone comes in. And, obviously the saxophone is only about maybe 100 years old, maybe 150 years old as an instrument. And it still involves breath and it still involves like wind. But the saxophone, as you know, it just has like all these different levers and things on it. So it's kind of this juxtaposition of like where music began, where men were singing in church, as sort of like a devotion to God. These were like monks singing. You go from that to basically one of the most modern acoustic instruments kind of performing, and it almost inspires jazz a little bit. Like you feel a little bit of that like kind of sleazy alleyway saxophone type thing. So there's those two worlds that are colliding. And for me, I mean, talk about like the music describing sort of, the world we're entering, where there's kind of really old, like human beginning things being juxtaposed with a really advanced technology. And so I think it's just like the perfect music to kind of get the vibe of something ancient and sacred mixed with something new and sort of revolutionary. And I think it's just such a great way to set it up. And, even in that first scene too, before the credits and that cold open, we get kind of, I don't know. It's unsettling, and at the same time feels very human and lived in. And it's clear that something's going on with Forrest, and this is not a man who's in the best days of his life.
Yeah, it's an interesting opening because it is unsettling. Because you really just don't, you get these very harshly juxtaposed things where, like you said, there's a homeless individual screaming silently, but screaming. And of course we do have vocals on the audio track. Then we see kind of San Francisco with the fog and with the sun coming through, something that looks very tranquil and pleasant. And then we cut to somebody doing exercise in the park, like you said, Pete. Then we see a little girl on multiple monitors who's blowing a dandelion.
That's right. I forgot about that.
And then we cut to Forrest, as you said, looking like even if you didn't know what was going on, you understand that he is not in a great place. Right. So we've already gotten, without knowing it, several major characters who we will see over the course of the series in different ways. Right now we don't know who they are, except for, everybody's going to know Nick Offerman's one of the stars because you would know him. He was so heavily promoted. You would have to know that. But you don't know what he's really doing. You won't know for a while what he's actually doing. But again, it just sets up this idea that you're seeing this place that there's a lot of wealth in. There's a lot of money and technology, like cutting edge at the time technology. And yet now we're also seeing kind of human wreckage in multiple forms with, like you said, these very specific musical cues and kind of background music that is, it does sound like the sax is screaming while the kind of chant is reverent, or, you know, not screaming men in the background going, ah, fuck, you know, it's not like people panicking. So you have this tranquil vocal part
They're almost
on
like
a very
meditating.
harsh.
Yeah, they sound like
the
they're
dynamics
meditating.
It's such a, again, like the imagery we're seeing, where we're seeing things that look peaceful and tranquil, like a guy doing exercise in the park. Okay. Overhead shot, nice fog. Oh, sun's coming through. Everything looks okay. There's not fires. The city isn't being overrun by zombies. It looks nice enough, you know, but then the final shot of Forrest just looking devastated. And then we go to this credit sequence that's very out of focus and very kind of organic, and these gold tones and black, and then the word DEVS comes in and then immediately like ethers out, so you barely even see it. And it's a beautiful opening. Again, so much of this show is just not like stuff I usually see. And that right there, that would hook most people into, okay, what is this? You know, to
I'll
establish
at least watch
it.
40 minutes of this. I think when I watched that opening, I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to like this show or whatever. I'll give it a try. Joe said recommended it. And after that opening, I was like, all right, I'm going to watch 8 episodes of this.
And even following that, because I'm just scrubbing through the video in the background to remind myself, we get then this shot of all the tops of trees and this statue of a young girl, which never doesn't look terrifying to me. Like, it always looks menacing, even though it's not supposed to. I think it's kind of the same thing with what I've read about, like the statue of David that Michelangelo did, where it's meant to be looked at from a certain angle, and any other angle it looks off. And I think with the statue that we see on the campus, the Amaya campus, if you're not looking straight at it, it looks terrifying. When you see it from below, there's parts where there's light that bounces off the eyes and it looks like a demon. It's obviously not supposed to look like that, but most of the angles we see of it are very sinister. This one is fairly neutral because we're seeing it from the tree line. But there again, you're seeing something that's completely out of normality, this gigantic statue, to the point where you might be like, okay, is this a fantasy? What is this? What am I looking at? And then it cuts to people on a bus going to work, like at a Google-like campus. So again, there's you're getting a lot of stuff thrown at you in the first 4 to 5 minutes that I think is meant to really keep you wondering what you're looking at. And I think it's very effective because beautiful visuals, but also this contrast, this push and pull between stuff that looks very normal and pedestrian and things that look very out of the ordinary, outside of the fact that most people don't work on a Google-like campus. So even that is kind of its own alien world. And with this giant statue, it's even more so. So I think that this is such a beautiful opening to make you sit there and go, all right, I want to know what's going on, and I have no idea. So I think this opening is so good. It's just so bold and interesting and unique.
And that's a great point too, is that, you know, the statue and, you know, throughout the show, we'll talk about, you know, this statue kind of reappears and is looked at different angles. And sometimes I see a little girl playing. Sometimes I see like a horrified witness. You know what I mean? Like, I see different things depending on how they're shooting it and looking at it. I will say, as far as all the effects, and by the way, usually in a Garland movie, the effects are just amazing and everything looks fantastic. And so far, this TV series is on par with all his feature films, which have always looked great. So that was one thing, like you said, like, I don't normally see this on TV. I don't see this level of like detail and production in a TV show. But I felt like the statue, I just felt like it just felt a little like, that's CG, you know, like I would say build it, you know, like just build it, man. But for how often it's in the series and this and that, there might have been, you know, just budgetary concerns. But it does sometimes, it takes me out of it a little bit just because it doesn't always quite seem to be real. Like, even if they built half of it, you know, we talk so much about with the, with Star Trek and where they, you know, actually built the models of the ships and just the level of detail, because they knew the ships, you know, they had to have their ship porn, right? It had to look really, really good. So I don't know, that's like probably the only thing I could say as far as visuals or anything visually or sonically that let me down in the show, because I mean, everything else was fantastic. But yeah, something told me though too, like I've never been to a Google campus before, but I'm like, I'm pretty sure on most like Google campuses, there's not a giant child statue. So I think right off the bat, you're just kind of like, well, what's that all about? Like, there's got to be some story behind that.
Yeah, that is, as far as I agree. I don't know of any particular piece of statuary, if that's a word, that is that large on any campus anywhere. So it is definitely supposed to be unusual, but I think it is, and yes, the effect is not always great. Sometimes it's much better than others, and it is used sparingly, and there's times where it's used in a way that I think it is supposed to look unreal to it. It's supposed to look, I wonder if they subtly changed it. I would be very curious if it's actually always the same basic model. I would not be surprised if there's times where they altered it slightly, like the features, to make it look different. But it is, I think most people will pick up, okay, we saw the little girl on the TV. Now we see this statue. Forrest always looks like he's, maybe not miserable, but certainly never happy. So I think at times there's a lot you put together without somebody explicitly saying it. They do later tell you what's going on there, that he lost his daughter. We will hear him say that. That's not a spoiler because it's within the first 2 episodes. But we then cut from all that, which is really just establishing the main characters. And one thing I noticed on this rewatch is that there's often pairings of characters, which is a thematic underpinning of the whole thing, this idea of 2 ways of looking at things, 2 possibilities, a lot of pairing and duality to it. So we start off and we have our main characters, which are Lily and Sergey, who are both engineers at this Amaya company, which again is basically a Google type company. So you can just substitute the same idea. And a lot of people have criticized the lead actress's performance, Lily. And I'm going to tell you, as somebody who's worked with coders, developers, and engineers over the years, some of them are exactly like this. So I don't think it's a bad performance. I think that there are people who are highly intelligent, highly skilled people who don't necessarily operate socially and even in their mannerisms the way people expect. So I don't think that's bad acting. I think that's a specific type of, they at one point show her doing this mathematic, I don't know what the equations are supposed to be, but they make it that she's even far above the other people that she works with, that she's that far past them, where they're like, oh, you've memorized these numbers. And she's like, no, I could just do them. So I think that's what we're supposed to take. And it's not inauthentic to my experience of working with these individuals. I'm not saying every engineer is a dysfunctional weirdo. I'm just saying that some of them are clearly living half in their own world, and you can see it sometimes. It bleeds through, and that's just the way that they are. So I didn't think anybody was bad in the show.
Well, considering, by the way, too, Lily is in Ex Machina, and she plays this beautiful woman in that. And even just the way they have her haircut and kind of have her in just kind of like coder clothes or, more like engineer clothes, to kind of not make her, she's a really beautiful woman, right? And so they're kind of trying to also bring that all in. I will say though, like rewatching it though, I realized how much more emotional she is in the first episode, and kind of more, she feels more, less, maybe if we're saying she's kind of a little bit on the spectrum or autistic in a way, she feels more part of the community in the first episode than I remember from the rest of the series.
Yeah. There
which could make sense depending on, considering what will come.
Yeah, what comes later, I think, explains why she seems less. But you're right. She is connected to people. She has friends, that type of thing. Although there's a really haunting scene where she's talking to her mother in the second episode, where she's talking about having friends around. There's nobody in the room, and it's a really sad scene in many ways. But we're jumping a little bit ahead. So they get to the campus, and Sergey is demoing something for Forrest and Katie, who are basically the Jobs and Wozniak, for all intents and purposes, of this company. And what they're trying to show off is a predictive model that can predict within, they say, 10 seconds to 30 seconds of how this very simple organism will behave. So it's a predictive model. And the model seems to be very impressive. Forrest says, okay, yeah, this is great work. And he invites him to join this thing called DEVS. And we immediately, there's no explanation of what that is. We don't get a setup. We don't see it being built. There's no background. But we immediately understand that this is the best top secret project on this campus. Like, this is the top end thing. Because then Sergey and Lily have this conversation about, that they're not going to be able to discuss it. Like it's like a CIA project where they're not going to be able to talk. And so most of this episode, a stunning amount of this episode, is really just setup. It is for an episode that's 40-something minutes long, most of it is just all the establishing of the company, the characters. There's a whole security screening where we meet Kenton, who is a fascinating character, who is a savage, sinister character, but treats everything like it's just the most annoying part of his job, even if it is murdering somebody, which he will be doing on multiple occasions within these first 2 episodes. But he's just like... Really?
He kind of has an Airman Trout. He has an Airman Trout kind of vibe from Breaking Bad, where he's just like he just like wants to go and spend time with his grandkid, like, but he's got to like kill these drug dealers. To, like, he's just like, all right, I'll clean up your mess, but like I'm waiting to retire here, No,
it is literally that, where his body language is just like annoyed and smoking, just throwing a cigarette. Like that's no matter what's going on, he just always seems perpetually irritated that he has to do these things. Not any no morality, no actual investment in what's happening. He's just kind of like, yeah, this job sucks a lot of days. Just, all right, fine. And so the bulk of the middle is, like I said, the explanation that he's getting into devs, the security screening, introducing the characters, which are primarily going to be Lily, Forrest, Katie, some of the devs engineers who we don't really get to know right away, but we see them very briefly in the first episode. And it's basically all this stuff that Sergei has to go through, and they bring him into this beautiful, weird building that is all covered in, it's got like a Faraday cage outside, it's concrete and gold and steel, and it's all held together by magnets that are basically making the room float. And inside we see this wonder machine, this some kind of supercomputer, which at one point Sergei says, well, how many bits is it computing? And Forrest says, a number so high it's not even worth saying it. You couldn't even understand it. And he puts him at a desk and says, okay, here's your station. Take your time, work on whatever hours you want, and I'm sure you'll do great. And Sergei says, well, what am I supposed to be doing? And he's like, just look at the code and you'll figure it out. But we don't get an explanation. I mean, even Sergei doesn't know what he's supposed to be doing, has no idea what his purpose is there. And like I said, we see some of the other characters.
I will say, just going back just a little bit to the scene with Katie and Forrest and Sergei, where Sergei is kind of showing off this new predictive model that he created. There's this conversation after it fails. So they can only predict, I think, to like 30 seconds. So they're able to predict this microbe up to a certain amount. And then after, I think they said 30 seconds, the model doesn't work anymore. And so Forrest asks him, he goes, Sergei, why do you think this is? And Sergei's like, well, there's 2 reasons. Either it's because computationally, the numbers get so ridiculous that the computer can't keep up. Or he mentioned something about a multiverse, which I don't understand this, but he's like saying somehow in another multiverse, they do line up or something like that. And Forrest is like, let me stop you right there. He's like, he's like, I would say it's the first. He's like, I don't believe in a multiverse. So he said, I believe it's the first scenario, like sort of the limits of the computations you have, which kind of lends him to taking him to devs, which he reveals to us is basically a computer that doesn't seem to have any computational limitation.
Yeah, some kind of supercomputer. And what he's referring to is what's called the many worlds theory. And this is the theory that every possible permutation of any choice anyone makes has happened somewhere. We're just not able to observe it. So if you went left at a street, somewhere in some other world, you went right, or you didn't go at all. Like every possible outcome, which is, an infinite thing to contemplate. And yes, Forrest
and Sergei said it could be that, but Forrest very quickly was like, nope, I don't prescribe to that.
Yeah, he says, not a fan of the many worlds theory, which will come into play later. But so, yes, he takes him, and essentially it makes sense because he's saying, well, if the problem is the numbers, well, I've got a computer that'll solve that problem for you. Let's go. And so takes him to this thing. And we see Sergei is sitting at his station, and he's looking at the code, and then Katie walks over, and he says, well, if this code is accurate, this changes everything. And she says, no, actually, it would change nothing. And it's an interesting phrase that if you're watching the show, hold on to that particular little set of sentences because they will come into play later. It's an interesting statement because, the whole this changes everything is such a trite phrase you hear all the time. And her response of, No, it changes nothing.
Maybe it doesn't change anything. Like, by the way, that felt like a very Lost. Like, after watching 6 seasons of Lost, like in my formative years, I was like, oh man, like, you know, like that's such a like, let's not tell you what the smoke monster is type scenario. Like, I was just when she said that, and so like there was little parts like that when I first watched it got me frustrated. But of course, now having seen it before, I was like, oh no, like Alex Garland wrote this, and this is an important concept.
Well, and one thing about this show is, for a while, you feel like this is going to be a J.J. Abrams fake out, like this, to go to your Lost thing, where you're like, okay, this is going to be a bunch of questions and no answer, and it's just going to go on, and we're going to be left with nothing. And it is absolutely not that. There is an ending, there is an answer, it is all in fact here. But yes, in this first episode, just to be objective about it, very little happens. And much of what you're seeing is almost inexplicable. Literally, nobody's explaining what's going on. So you're left kind of to try to interpret,
which is why it feels bigger. It feels like it's really straightforward. The second time you watch it, you're like, oh, okay, well, that would make sense. That sets up that. That sets up that. But when you're first watching it, you're like, wait, what's going on? We're in a supercomputer now? Like, what's going on? There's a Faraday cage, and like, what? There's code, and it changes everything, but it changes nothing. I'm just like, I need a nap.
And then we find that Sergei starts messing with his watch in the bathroom after he throws up, and we very quickly figure out that he's recording onto his watch.
See, I didn't, by the way, the first time I saw this, I didn't understand he was recording with his watch. I like missed that because I thought he was in the bathroom throwing up because he saw what the code was. And there was a haunting scene where he's interrogated before that, and the interrogator, Keaton or Kenton, asks him, are you religious or whatever? And then there's all this weird religious chant music happening in the background. So I'm just like, wait, did they like create God or something? Like what? You know, like, and so I thought, was he throwing up at what he saw? But like you said, he apparently was with his watch.
Well, and I think you're meant to think that. I think you're meant to think that he's that partially because he doesn't know what he's supposed to do, and something so grandiose, and you're supposed to contribute to it. You're lost. And the only thing I think that gives it away, which is one of the few times I'm like, the direction could have been more subtle, is you get these really obvious shots where he's like this with a big watch face.
That wasn't obvious enough for me, but you're right. Rewatching it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, he's clearly...
Because he does it twice. And that's the thing is, once you might just be like, oh, he's pondering. But then he does it again, and it's like, okay, you're seeing the reflection in the watch.
And even when she comes over to give him water, Katie comes over to give him water, he like... you know, like kind of hides, you know, like moves the watch away when he's talking to her. And
And he says, oh, is this code what I think it, you know, so you could play it off to the like nervousness and that. But then when he does it again, so specific, it's such a like GQ pose where he's like, you know, it's like, okay, that's not how people normally contemplate. I don't know.
I don't do code. Maybe
like
that's
this,
how people code. I don't know.
I mean, I guess some people must go like this and be very, very stiff with the complete reflection of their watch. I suppose that's possible. So what we figure out is that you may not, but what he's doing is he's recording what he's seeing on the screen into his watch. So he's there for some long amount of time, well into the evening, because it's pitch black when he leaves. And he leaves and is then confronted in this forest full of golden halo lights in the trees.
Beautiful, which is a beautiful shot.
Which I can completely believe on a campus like this they would have it. Like nothing is out of place.
Do we know what those lights are though? Is there like any previous like?
I did notice that there looked like there were strings like holding them up. Because at first I was like, are these supposed to be like levitating? Is this sci-fi levitating lights? But I was pretty sure. Now, whether it was production error or intentional, I don't know. But I did see kind of suspension strings. So to me, I think it's supposed to be, they're not suspended. I think they're supposed to just be on strings where they're powered. Probably solar powered with something in the trees. What their purpose is, just to look cool. It doesn't seem to serve any actual functional purpose engineering-wise.
Well, I think they're motion. They are motion sensitive, I think, too, right? Because like as you walk by, I think they're supposed to turn on or...
I assume so. They certainly do when Forrest is just standing there. And so we get this confrontation where Forrest is waiting for Sergei. And I don't have a lot of clips from this show, but I have 3. And this is one of them. And this is our first real... Because a lot of what we see of Forrest is kind of pretty jovial, or as much as he can be. And it's kind of loose and light. And he's talking when he's going through security screens, like, did they get their shoe size? Like, he's playing around a little bit. He's trying to be light about things, even though now we know this code is something amazing and huge and potentially world changing or whatever. But when we see him in the forest, he is dead serious. And then we get this explanation as to why Sergei did what he did.
The universe is deterministic.
Sorry?
The universe is deterministic. It's godless and neutral and defined only by physical laws. The marble rolls because it was pushed. The man eats because he's hungry. An effect is always the result of a prior cause. The life we lead, with all its apparent chaos, is actually a life on tram lines. Prescribed, undeviating, deterministic. I know it doesn't feel that way, Sergei. We fall into an illusion of free will because the tram lines are invisible. And we feel so certain about our subjective state. Our feelings, our opinions, judgments, decisions. You joined my company, gained our trust, gained my trust, then stole my code on your James Bond wristwatch.
I don't know what you mean.
That would appear to be the result of some decisions, wouldn't it? About where you placed your allegiance, about who you would betray. But if we live in a deterministic universe, then those decisions can only have been the result of something prior. Where you were born, how you were brought up, the physical construction of your particular brain. It's the nature-nurture matrix, exactly like the nematode worm in your simulation. It's more complex, more nuanced, but still, at the end of the day, cause and effect. I hope you understand what I'm saying, Sergei. This is forgiveness. This is absolution. You made no decision to betray me. You could only have done what you did.
This is such an interesting scene because you really don't know what will happen. I had a hunch on what was going to happen next, but honestly, the way he's explaining his philosophy, and then when he gets to the end about saying he's forgiven him, and it's like, and it is this idea of determinism where you made no choices. This is where you had to be. We are getting his core philosophy. And this explains why he doesn't like the idea of the many worlds theory, is because that allows every possibility. But no, he's saying, no, everybody does what they have to do. You're here because these things happened before, so you had no option but to do what you did. And again, there's parts of this where Forrest comes off, actually I shouldn't say comes off. I don't believe he's supposed to be sinister by nature. He's not an evil person. He sees the world this very specific way, which means things have to be done a specific way. And I think it makes him so riveting to look at because even because we're about to see a murder happen right after this scene, but in it, he doesn't sound like a lunatic. He doesn't sound angry. He's not upset really. It's more like he's disappointed that this is the result that has to happen. He knows that this had to happen. He doesn't like it, but he doesn't seem to, as far as I can tell, hold any actual personal ill will towards Sergei. And that's what that entire kind of diatribe is about, is, hey, I don't blame you. This is just where the universe placed you because this is the only place you could be. It's a amazing scene. Like the whole way it's shot, he's got the halo around his head at one point, like the lights. It's just so well constructed. It's one of these scenes. And that scene is at about... It's over halfway through the episode before this happens. And you don't even realize how far in you are, but it's a fantastic scene. I love it.
And it's funny, you mentioned, he's like joking around earlier and saying, during, just kind of being like this kind of aloof. He's eating like grass in the meeting. He's eating some type of like lettuce, and he has a big beard, and he just looks like this unassuming, goofy guy. And all of a sudden, here he is now in the somewhat dark, in the middle of the night, kind of just spouting off this deterministic philosophy. And the thing to me that I got really worried, or I should say excited actually, for the show, I was like, oh, well, here's a person that doesn't believe in personal responsibility. And they have lifted that moral compass, right? Which would be, well, if everything's already determined and you are going to do what you're going to do because of all the other things that has happened before you, then you really aren't responsible. And he's saying, Sergei, I forgive you because it's not your fault for trying to steal the code. It's because of who you are. It's just it's like when your dog chases a squirrel or something like that. You're not mad at the dog for chasing the squirrel. You're like, that's what it's designed to do. But that scared the shit out of me because I was like, that means this guy is going to do things and say to himself, well, is it really my fault? Is it my responsibility? Or was it just determined to happen? And so I said, wow, this character is actually the supervillain. Maybe.
Well, I mean, as you said, it does relieve everyone of any moral responsibility. Interestingly, Forrest uses specific religious wording: forgiveness, absolution, the halo of the light. So there's this fascinating kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily a commentary on getting forgiven for things that you've done by the church or anything. It doesn't seem overt, although we will see religious imagery in the second episode. So it's peppered all over, but it's not really about religion per se. Although you could regard any complete devotion to an idea as a religious belief. So
it was more morality. I think it's less like, oh, they don't believe in God. I think they're just saying what are the moral implications of things? And they're kind of saying there is, like he says at the start of that whole monologue, it's cause and effect, and it's the laws of physics and nature. It's not anything else.
Well, it also plays with the idea of free will versus does God have a plan? Right? I mean, how does free will work within a planned framework, right? So it is, again, this show does make you start to go, wait a second, and start to kind of think about how things would actually function and, some of the inherent contradictions. I'm not trying to impugn anybody's religion, believe whatever you want, but I'm saying this show does tug and pull without being directly, specifically talking about it. It is talking about these things and the idea of, well, what is, determinism versus free will? How can that work? Because there is, if you think about it within a certain context, determinism does make a lot of sense. We think we have free will, but obviously free will is constrained by social structure, class, money, your upbringing. These are all things that don't necessarily stop you from making certain choices, but they may prevent you from ever considering them. They may be out of the frame of your consideration. That's not, you can't choose it. You would never think to, because these steps in your past have kept you in a certain lane, as he says, or on the tram lines. It is interesting. There's a lot of philosophy in this episode, or in the show in general. But right there, you get a whole bunch of things to sit there. You could take just that one little monologue, and you could chew on that for a couple days going, wow, what would it mean? Because there are people who believe in this. What is believing everything is determined? What does that mean as far as, do you feel any regret for anything you're doing? Does pain even matter to you? Can you even consider yourself to harm anyone if it was all predetermined?
You know how when you hear the Joker or Lex Luthor tell us their philosophy on life, and you're like, man, this guy makes a lot of good points. The only thing is, in order to reach his objective, you have to kill millions of people. So you're like, I'm not going to do that, right? But you're like, otherwise the logic has this real kind of, there's this logic behind it. But the fundamental problem, and I think that I got Lex Luthor vibes from Forrest in this scene, because I'm like, everything he's saying is making sense and it's scientific, but he's missing that governor, or that fail-safe that prevents you from basically murdering somebody, which happens right after this.
Well, and there are a lot of individuals in these big tech companies who will say we should not consider the cost of progress. Progress should come at any cost. Who cares who gets hurt if we get to something better that's always right over the next hill? That is a very pervasive attitude, which I think is terrifying, but it's out there. And there are people, that's the move fast, break things philosophy. Hey, to make progress, you got to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, right? Jack Nicholson, Joker right there. It explains the whole thing. So yes, immediately following the scene, then Kenton comes up with a plastic bag, which has to be one of the worst ways you could possibly die, is asphyxiation through a simple plastic bag you get in a grocery store. But there is a piece of music that plays, and I'm going to play it now. And now in the show, I will play the clip in the video, but I will not put the sound effects in because I think this functions perfectly well without. Now, in the show, there are sound effects. You will hear him like straining against the paper, like the rustle of the grass. But I think even without that, there is so much in this piece of music that communicates what's happening that if you only heard this, you might actually visualize to some degree what is happening in the scene. So let me play this. This is on the soundtrack and it's called Suffocation, which I guess tells you everything.
Yeah, I think the composer Ben, I think it's Salisbury. I think is that how you pronounce it, or Salisbury. He did all the other soundtracks. So all the other soundtracks, the other Garland films. So Ex Machina and Annihilation, which I watched recently, and it's funny. Like I heard things from this soundtrack in those soundtracks, like similar kind of ideas, and and we'll talk about that a little later with some of like the kind of other popular music that's kind of infused in some of the episodes. But yeah, man, I mean, this sounds like Suffocation, doesn't it? And it's once again, it's voices. And one thing I was even going to say earlier, when Sergei was like first discovering the machine and reading the code, it was voices once again. And it wasn't the plain chant vocals that we heard at the start with just a male choir. It was female voices, and they were stacked and they're layered, and they were being kind of like repeated and processed. So, early on in the show, like the first music we hear is men singing unaffected and very kind of quiet, like you had mentioned, right? So much quieter than the saxophone. Where this now is very processed. It sounds like female vocals. It sounds like they're just kind of being stretched and warped. And so I really like that. I like how obviously it's intense. It's frightening. It's terrifying. If you were in your home alone, if you emptied your apartment and you heard these sounds happening in your apartment, you'd probably, burn the place down and go move somewhere else, right? Live somewhere else. But no, seriously. So, and that's cool. It is effective that way. But I love how he continues to use voices throughout. So there's always this like kind of theme going on that like what it is to be human, having a voice. And then there's always these manipulations. And especially with the vocals here, you almost hear like that really bad, like, YouTube compression that happens, on like a really low res YouTube video, which is that like just truncation or quantization that would happen when a computer is not, calculating enough information or is not, interpreting the digital signal at a high enough resolution. So it feels like it's being manufactured by a computer. So I think that works really great. Obviously, it works great in Ex Machina because you've got the robots, synthetic people, and I think it's really great. And yeah, what's more terrifying than the sound of kind of like these clustered female vocals and this like just huge low impactful kind of droning sort of beat that keeps happening, which is way inconsistent. Once you think it's going to come back in, it'll wait a little bit before it comes back in. So it's really disorienting.
Yeah, I would be really curious. I haven't seen anything on how this track was composed. Was this like attenuated to a heartbeat slowing down? I mean, I imagine when your head's in a bag, all the sound gets, your blood's rushing in your ear. Like it really is there's an Aphex Twin track called Ventolin, which is supposed to be his expression of an asthma attack. And I thought of that hearing this. I also thought of 2001. A lot of soundtracks we listen to, I hear 2001 with the voices again, where I'm like, 2001.
The Ligeti Lux Eterna, which is like it's a choir piece that was in 2001. It's that same vibe where it's kind of exciting, but it's also really unsettling. I mean, the same composer, Ben Salisbury, also did the show. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's something 81. Oh, Archive 81.
Oh, that was a great show. Terrible ending.
Terrifying.
Netflix.
Terrible. Yeah, there was some bad episodes, but the episodes that were good were terrifying. And once again, it was these like female vocals. I mean, even Squid Game had these like really disconcerting kind of vocals that were happening throughout, which feel kind of familiar because they're like human, but at the same time they're being either repeated or distorted. So, really, wonderful, just unsettling and very different than the start where we hear like kind of the plane chant, and even as Sergei's discovering the machine, it's kind of this like the voices of like discovery and wonder, and you're just kind of like, wow, like what amazing thing is he uncovering. This was very different. This was somebody being murdered by asphyxiation from a bag from Pete and Larry's or some Zellers or some crappy third-hand store bag, because it took a while. This scene was long.
Yeah, and in the scene we see Forrest watching, so he's not turning away. He doesn't leave. He watches what happens, and then Katie's also there, and so it's the two of them, and then Kenton, of course, is suffocating Sergei. And then we go from that scene, which is horrifying, top to bottom, to then what feels like a very set of normal scenes where Lily realizes Sergei never came home. She suspects something's wrong. She goes to the office. They track him. They see him walking away, and he just kind of disappears off the campus. And Forrest shows up what seems like randomly, but of course we know that this is all orchestrated and set up, and says, all right, well, we're going to handle this by the book. Let's call the police. Let's report him missing. Let's jump all over this. And he tells Lily, I'm all over this. Don't worry about it. I'm going to cover it. And take the rest of the day off, and we'll let you know as soon as we know something. And it's going to be fine. He's going to turn up. We'll have an explanation for it. All those scenes feel very true to life on what would happen if somebody just disappeared for a day. This is all the normal routine stuff. And everybody's like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. And then after that, we see Lily go home and must immediately just has a suspicion something's wrong. She takes out this phone of Sergei's and tries to do basically they can't say iCloud backup, but they do an iCloud restore on the phone.
It's pretty much that.
Exactly. And she finds
I was like, so that's how you do that. I'm like, that would be really helpful.
It is pretty much that simple if you know the password. I mean, bad security on Sergei. I mean, you're that password. I mean, you trust people, but that's you're giving away your password, man. You got to be real careful with that stuff. You better be real sure when you give away your password to your phone. So she does the restore, and then she sees that there's a Sudoku game on it, and that he hates that game, and she tries to open it, and there's a password, which immediately makes her suspicious. So then there's a scene that we then cut to where we see Forrest sitting outside of the DEVS building, looking like he's been crying. His eyes are all red. He looks like something just happened. And we get this back and forth between him and Katie. And it's beautifully shot. If you get to see the video, there's all these reflections. There's a lot of reflections of people, distortions of people's faces. Like there's all this stuff that is clearly visually communicating things. You won't get it all from the dialogue, but it is gorgeous. I mean, everything in this is gorgeously shot, really. There's no bad looking anything outside of maybe the statue effect in the entire show. And so Katie comes up
Can I
and
ask
they
you a
have
question
this
really quickly?
Sure, yeah.
So
Yeah.
those gold bars that are in the ground. So I understand the whole building where the computer is located is like a Faraday cage. So it's like separated, right, from everything else. But what are those bars in the ground? Are they just like to prevent like electrical conduction? Because later when Sergei leaves, you know, or earlier in this episode, later, there's like all these fireflies around them or whatever. So are they just like, do they serve some type of scientific purpose? Because I didn't know. I didn't know if you knew. What they were for.
I mean, he's talking about the Faraday cage when they're there, and he's kind of pointing to them. So I don't know if they're part of it. I know basics of a Faraday cage, but on that scale for what's being done, maybe those are something that release their heat conductors, or who knows. I don't specifically know. It could just be that they look neat. And, you know, they're cooling rods. It could be anything,
There is the
really.
heat sink fins on the top of the building. I saw like there's like the little fins on the top.
And there's water, which I assume is like, I think that's water that's supposed to be like a water cooling system. So it may just be basically like an exposed computer where those are actually part of the internal structure, but they're outside for some reason because they look neat. It could very well. I mean, gold is a really good conductor. You see it gold tipped, you know, so there's, I'm not really sure. It could just be that they look neat and they don't actually have a reason, or they just made something up. They can, when you're talking about a qubit supercomputer that can, you know, do so many calculations, you can't even give it a number that means anything. I guess gold statues outside are gold monoliths. 2001. They like 2001 monoliths. We can't do black ones. We'll do gold ones. Okay, got it. So, yeah, I really don't know. I'd be curious myself. I should have looked because I was thinking that too. I'm like, what are these things really? Are they actually part of it? Or is this a BS wave away explanation of why we wanted something neat looking? Because they definitely used the reflection elements of them for the storytelling.
Well, yeah. And if they were black, they might have looked too menacing. So maybe they were like, if they're gold, we can have them reflective. And then,
it was probably for that, but hey, if anybody knows, I'd be very curious if there is actually an explanation. And there may be one. When you're talking about this type of stuff, there could be a theoretical supercomputer that actually uses these types of things that nobody's ever built, and they use that. That's very possible. So Katie walks up, and they have this back and forth about the nature of morality.
Hi. I know. It's really hard.
It really shouldn't be.
No, it shouldn't. But it is. What are we supposed to do? Unravel a lifetime of moral experience? Unlearn what has always seemed true? These things, they run deep.
Yeah, they do.
It's like whatever we know, the things we feel are still locked inside us. Human beings are hardwired, magical thinkers. You could have the most rational person in the world, but if their kid gets hurt, they'll start praying. I'm sorry. That was clumsy.
It's fine, Katie. You're right.
Now, I'm going to pay attention as we go along here, but this is now the second significant conversation where there's no music. The first one about determinism, all the music dropped out right before he started talking. And this, I mean, there's nature sounds. And the other clip I have, which I think is a significant one, also really has no music but background stuff. But here again, once you finish the series, this conversation takes on a much different light. When I first watched it, I didn't really think too much. I thought it was just a comforting scene where she's just trying to explain, because he is clearly racked with morality, and he's saying, I shouldn't feel like this, which makes sense with a deterministic view of the world. And yet here he does appear to be genuinely upset about what he's had to do, or what had to happen, I guess, within, you know, his construct of the world. And there are things, again, that if you pay attention to what's being said and think about it once you get into the series, there's a lot that's being communicated here, but without the context of what comes later, It just sounds like two people that are probably just hyper intelligent having a discussion about morality, but it's actually a much deeper conversation and kind of a somewhat of a foreshadowing of what will come later and the explanation for what's going on.
Well, and I think considering you saw, Forrest earlier to Sergei say he has no morality because there's no need for it, and then you watch the three of them murder somebody, right? So I think this is walking that back a little bit. And then you watched, by the way, Forrest as well as Keaton then go and deceive Lily and pretend like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Like, we have no idea. So this kind of then you see him sitting there crying. So you assume, wait, he is having some remorse about killing another human being. So you think that when I watched it the first time, I'm like, that's what this scene is about, well, they do actually have remorse. And, like Katie was saying, it's like we know one thing to be true where they believe in this deterministic, where it's nobody's fault and there's no responsibility. But like she said, we're hardwired to, think it's wrong to hurt other people and kill other people. So it was really nice. And I think if you're watching it for the first time, you're like, oh, they were actually upset about killing the person. That's a good sign, right? Like that's a good sign because maybe I'm not getting Lex Luthor vibes anymore than here. Like they're not just going to, like kill billions of people here. They do still have that governor somewhat of knowing, what's wrong and right, or either just, that taking other lives is, morally and highly questionable.
I also wonder if it's meant to have you stop and think that maybe Forrest isn't really the person behind this, that Katie is, because she's very cold and devoted, but she's very she doesn't express a ton of emotion for almost the entire series. Whereas he looks broken down and she's like, no. She doesn't
feel remorse. She doesn't. She's absolutely, and I'm not saying, people with autism or whatever, I'm not like making a slur about this, but she represents classically as somebody who doesn't understand the emotional aspect of what's going on. And at other points in the show, she will show some emotion, but she was clearly sat down next to him and said, here's somebody having an emotional reaction, and I'm not sure what that is, but I know the right thing to say. And so I think you're right. It felt like, well, maybe Forrest isn't really the mastermind here. Maybe Katie's driving, and it doesn't look like Katie has any moral compass. But yet she still is being compassionate to Forrest. So you're like, does she have some compassion for him? Does she feel for him? Or is she just kind of manipulating him? Or, so who's really behind this? Is it Keaton, the thug who's, strangling people? Is it Forrest, the Lex Luthor genius? Or is it Katie who at this point, seems emotionless?
Or it could be somebody feeding somebody else's kind of fervor. She could be feeding it into it, and Forrest is having doubts, and she's trying to erase the doubts. So I do like the scene because, again, knowing what we know later, I don't think there's any insincerity in it, but it does make you, when you don't know what's happening, start to question, okay, I thought I knew what was happening here, but am I wrong about this? Am I looking at the wrong person? Is my interpretation of what's happening here the correct one? And there's a whole bunch of that through the whole show. So now we're at the very end. The next day, during the evening, Lily gets a call and they say, come in right away. And we're at the end of the episode now. And this is when I watched this the first time. I did not realize that this was the end of the episode. But we see this shot of the statue and we see this light in front of it. And then she gets this call and they bring her in and they say, we have some video we have to show you. And what the video is Sergei lighting himself on fire. And it's not cut away. You don't not see it. You see the entire process of him dump the gasoline on himself, light the fire, take a couple of steps, and collapse. And then she runs out of the building over to where they've still got it taped off, but the burned body is there. And again, it's not, you don't see it from a distance. You see it close up, close enough that you see his ear burned off. And she starts screaming. And then we get this shot of Forrest, who again looks like he's been crying. His eyes are red. Mm-hmm. And then it cuts to credits. And that's the end of the first episode, at which point I was hooked because I was like,
right.
Whoa, that is not something I
set somebody on fire. Yeah.
I mean, to end the episode like that, where we have almost no information outside of, Sergei was a spy. That's all we know. But obviously he didn't set himself on fire. So it's like, well, now what? Where is this going to go? Like, this is a great way to end a first episode, because I could not possibly not keep watching it based on that. And the music that's used, like her screaming, it's really well done. Like, it's a dynamite end of an episode. It's fantastic.
I agree. I think it's really interesting. It's weird though, because the first scene where they strangle him to death with the plastic bag, that felt like I'm like, oh, the episode's going to end right here, because I won't know anything. I won't know why, but I'll just know he was a spy and they killed him. And the fact that the episode then went on, I was like, well, how are they going to end it? How are they going to top that? So they set somebody on fire. I will say one thing though, like you just brought up, the statue of the girl that's been kind of haunting the scenery here at the Google-esque complex. We see a shot of the fire glowing on the statue. Is that correct? Yeah, correct. We do. And I noticed that in the
first
rewatching.
It's all in darkness, and you just see it. It's like at night, and you see it, and then you hear the sound.
Yeah, it's like the top of the trees. And
it's from like almost level, and then you hear like this whoosh, and you see the thing, and you hear an alarm, and that's and then it cuts to Lily getting the call. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we're watching the rest of it from the surveillance video. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, again, so many shots of this statue, which you would think is supposed to be, remembrance of the daughter, who at this point, even though nobody specifically said that the daughter is dead, like Katie's comment and saying, oh, sorry about, like everything, that this is the statue of his daughter. We only saw the one shot of her early on, and there's a couple of images like throughout the campus. So you know what this is. You don't know what's going on, but clearly the thing that is haunting him is the loss of his daughter.
And I agree with you. By the way, they may have been changing like the way the statue looked, because definitely in that scene, it looked like the statue was witnessing a horrifying event, where earlier when we saw the statue, it looked like maybe she was playing or like kissing a butterfly or something like that. So I wonder if they're actually changing it, or if it's like you said, it's just like how all they're shooting it as well. That just gives it a different perspective.
It wouldn't shock me, and it would be an interesting thing to do, because they do that kind of stuff where they do little subtle manipulations where things change. Like in Furiosa, they slowly age the young girl so that she looks like Anna Taylor-Joy by the time she's older, which I didn't even notice the first time, but then when I rewatched it, I'm like, oh yeah, her features are slightly, wow, that's really crazy that she looks like, different. They do it like scene by scene. They're slightly just changing things. It's brilliant storytelling because you don't notice it. So I don't know that for sure. It's just a hunch of mine. So that episode ends. We go to the second episode, and we see all these scenes, some of which we will see happen later in this episode. So we're seeing all these kind of intercut scenes.
Right. The cold open messed with the timeline, because now I'm seeing the first cold open didn't show us, I think, anything that hadn't already happened. But it felt like in this cold open for the second episode, I'm now seeing something, especially even one thing that doesn't happen until the very end of the episode.
Right. Yeah, literally the last thing in the episode. So yes, we see all these shots. We don't know what they mean. We don't even know who's in some of them, like the scene you're talking about, which is the very end of the episode. I didn't know who those two people were at first. It was not clear. So we're seeing all these shots. We don't know what they are. And then we cut back to the scene where Sergei's burned. So we see the body again. And then we see, and this is the clip I've got from this episode, is we see, and again, there's no music, but this is a scene where Forrest is talking to Lily about how he reacted when he lost, we don't know how, but when he lost his daughter. And again, this is one of those things where when you hear it, there's the duality is in there, and this will factor in to things that happen later in the series.
The moment my daughter was taken from me, it was as if I was instantly placed into two concurrent states. In one, I had a full understanding that Amaya was gone. There was no doubt, no hope, no holding on to anything, no going back, just the certainty of her death. In the other, I had no comprehension of her death. It was an impossible thing. An implausible thing, absurd, vast, meaningless, untrue. It wasn't just that they were contradictory states, they were absolute states. Each was complete in itself, leaving no room for the other. But I held them both. And still do. There was nothing anyone could say to me. There's nothing I can say to you. What I can offer is my duty of care. You can talk to me at any time. You can call me at any time. You have no professional obligations that you need to fulfill. Your job and your income are secure, and it'll stay that way for as long as you need it to.
So here again, by all outward appearances, Forrest is being understanding and compassionate and, saying you can take as long as you need. I've gone through this. I know what's happening. I understand what you're feeling. Like, all the outward appearances are of someone who is sincerely, and again, to some degree, I believe he is actually sincerely not happy that this has happened. He's not taking any blame for it. He's not taking any accountability for it outside of taking care of Lily. And you would assume that if Lily had just decided, okay, yeah, I guess he killed himself and that's all there is to it, that there's no reason to think that he would not have followed through on everything he was saying, that yes, her job would have been secure and, get through it, come back whenever you call me, I'll be there for you. There's nothing that comes up in the series that ever suggests that wouldn't have happened, except that Lily just does not accept it at face value. But it's, again, this fascinating scene about I exist in two states. For somebody who doesn't buy into the many worlds theory, he's describing essentially a facet of the many worlds theory. In one world, she's alive and this didn't happen. And in this one, it's unacceptable, but it did happen. So again, a fascinating scene in the context of the show.
It is. And when I was watching it the first time, I was like, oh, this is the scene where like Nick Offerman has to be like, hey, like, feel better. And I'm just like, oh, this is so tedious. But upon rewatching it, one of the things I noticed is it does develop Forrest's sort of concept once again of this binary cause and effect, right? And so once again, you're saying multi-universe, but he didn't say I trust many states. He said I trust two different states of either, she's dead and I identify that, or I can't fathom it. It seems absurd. So once again, I think it's like Forrest binary. You know what I mean? Like, I think they're really trying to hit that over the head, that he believes in cause and effect. This happened, therefore this. And I think, that'll go a lot into as the kind of show develops, but that tends to be a stance. And even later in this episode, he talks about, the problem that they're incurring, or the problems that they're incurring moving forward, is a binary one. So, I think it's like you said, the duality. It's fantastic because it's about him consoling her. It's also about him covering up the fact that he murdered her boyfriend. You know what I mean? So he's like doing that. So there's like three things going on. It's not binary, right? It's like, it's multi things, right? That he's covering up a murder. He's creating an alibi. He's consoling her. And then he's also espousing his sort of, binary, deterministic kind of philosophy. So, yeah.
Well, I think it functions in a couple ways. I don't think there's no accountability or responsibility. Therefore, he's not really covering up. This is something that happened. But I think what he's actually, as a secondary kind of messaging is he's saying, because at this point, his daughter's obviously gone. Okay, I believe she's still here and nobody can tell me otherwise. But of course, I also know that she's gone and this terrible thing happened. So no matter what doubts you may have as to what you saw and what is, he's dead, he killed himself, and at some point you'll just have to accept that, as I did. Certainly remember him, feel bad about it, but understand that what you saw is what you saw and what happened. I think that's kind of the underlying thing.
It's common that you think, yeah, that's really deep. I didn't even think of that, Joe. That, like, it's common to feel that maybe he committed suicide, but then he was murdered. Like, it's common to feel that way. You know, where like people would be like, no, if you think they didn't commit suicide, you should probably investigate, right? So you're right. He's kind of covering his tracks a little bit in a way where he's like, don't overthink it. Don't over investigate this. You can definitely think maybe this person committed suicide. Like, don't go too far. Don't dig too far.
And there's manipulation of Lily that happens throughout the episode. And maybe if she hadn't found his phone and seen the Sudoku, I never know how to pronounce that, the number game on it, maybe she would have just accepted it and gone on. Because certainly the idea that, okay, take as long as you need, do whatever you have to, your job's secure, like, it seems like he's being extraordinarily generous in letting her have as much time. And, you know, so she might have said, well, why would somebody being this understanding and kind have an ulterior motive? Like, you could see that if certain things, if she hadn't found the phone,
it's so layered.
She might have bought into it. But then what we find out is she's roped in her ex-boyfriend, who I love his first reaction when she goes to him for help. And he's like, oh, yeah, we were together. I was in love. You ditched my ass and now you want help. And he says, sincerely, fuck off, and walks away from her, which I'm like, that feels like an authentic reaction that I would probably have in the same circumstances.
That's like the dream you have where you can like tell the person off or whatever. Everyone wishes their like ex comes and like, you know, they take them out for a drink and they can just be like, you know what? Fuck you. You're cool. I'm out. You know, like everybody.
So what she does is she goes to his apartment and she climbs up and basically just shows up as he's playing Xbox. No. He's like,
no, hold on. He's playing
Dark Souls.
Dark Souls 2. And he's in the Iron Keep, and he says, as he's playing it, as we know about Dark Souls, like dying is part of the game, he says,
I died.
Oh, I died.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Lots of stuff to pay attention to in this episode is all we'll say. So she comes in and she tells him that Sergei's killed himself. And then his reaction is much different, understandably, because you find out that he's, you know, he still cares about her. Obviously, his first reaction was anger because he's still hurt. You don't react that way if you don't still have some kind of affection or feeling towards somebody. So now to hear that the boyfriend committed suicide, it reframes all the stuff from before. So again, understandably, although you do have to sit there and just as the most cynical, deep reptilian part of your brain think that he thought, oh, an opening. Let me be the person who's there for her now, because that's just a human being will be like that. So now he changes his tune really quickly. He's like, all right, I'll help you hack into his phone. And so he gets the phone, they crack the phone, and he says, okay, this is a phone that belongs to somebody working for the Russian government. I don't know how, but this isn't just somebody who locked down a part of their phone. This person is part of a state operation. And so he's like, it's a messaging app, and he gives it to her and she says, I have to read this alone. He's like, nope, I got it. No problem. And so what she does is she's looking at it and there's all these messages saying, hey, you haven't answered, blah, 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 which makes sense because, and you could almost have forgotten because the first episode was almost like a year ago in the terms of all the stuff that's been going on that, oh yeah, he was spying. Why was he spying? What was he doing? Well, now we're going to get that answer. And so she says she goes in the app and says, I want to meet. And the person in the app immediately is like, oh, this is Lily. This isn't him. So obviously she didn't follow whatever code or whatever protocols there were. And he's like, all right, meet me here tomorrow. And then they erase the phone. And so she shows up and meets a guy who's like, yeah, I work for the Russian government. Like, no pretense. He's like, yeah, my name's Anton. I'm the handler. And whatever they're telling you is bullshit. I can tell you right now, he didn't kill himself. He was murdered. He was spying for this thing. They must have found out, and he was murdered. He's like, and he says this thing again, there's this, Lily is just manipulated from all sides to some degree because he says, I know what they're telling you. I know what you saw, but what do you feel in your heart? Did he feel like he was going to kill himself? Like he's using her doubts, the other side of her doubts, the natural doubts, to try to recruit her to work for him. Because that's, no matter what he's saying, he doesn't care about her. None of these people care. So he's like, look, he's like, you could come work for us and I will help you find out what happened and we'll get to the bottom of this, because if they killed him, they must be covering something up awfully big. And do you really want, I mean, he doesn't say it, but he's like, do you really want to be a part of that? Maybe Sergei was onto something. So he's like, if you want to work for us, there's a chair in your apartment. Yeah, we know all about, I love how I was just like, yeah, we know everything. Come on. Sergei was one of our guys. Think we don't know everything? We know everything. Wow. Yeah. He's like, just the chair that you usually put your clothes on, just move it away from the window. And that will be your signal to us that you want to talk. And then, no commitments, just saying, I'll keep an eye out and just let me know by signaling in the window. And now at this point, you're sitting there going, okay, is this just industrial espionage? Is that what this show is going to be? Like, is all the morality window dressing for what ultimately is just going to be a spy tale? And I think that's what the show's trying to make you think, at least briefly. I think there's so much playing around with audience expectation and what you think the show is, where they're like, all right, we're going to set you up and you think it's this. Now we're going to introduce the doubt. Now we're going to say, no, it was that. No, it wasn't that. Or maybe it was that. Or maybe it's two things at once. And again, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are like, oh, really? This is just like a Tom Clancy story now? It's just going to be that they have a supercomputer and Forrest is just a lunatic guy and that's all it's about. And I think it's really effectively done because it does show Lily is like, I don't know what's going on. She's basically us. So, and with the way Anton talks, it's very smooth, natural, not sinister, not mean. He's like, no, I want to help you. This is wrong. You should be upset. You should, what's in your heart? Like the thing where he's talking about what's in your heart. I'm like, man, these people know how to play people. And again, it's kind of the opposite of Forrest, who's like, yeah, he's dead. You saw him die. It sucks. Take your time, but that's what happened. And Anton's like, no. That's not what happened. What you saw is not what you think you saw. You think they couldn't fake footage? Look in the mirror and think of Sergei. And think of what you truly believe. You knew him. She keeps saying you knew him and he knew you. So it's a great scene because I think it does make you wonder if all the determinism and if all that was just a bunch of BS and this is really just going to be about one company or a nation state trying to steal a supercomputer. I would not be surprised if some people had 10 to 15 minutes where they're like, really? All this theatricality and it's just going to end up being, the simple spy tale of two governments trying to get a supercomputer.
See, and here's my thing. So those scenes are interspersed with scenes where, I think you have a scene, I think a little bit before that, where you have Stuart and Lyndon in the computer viewing room. I don't know. And they have this conversation where they're kind of like arguing about it's kind of like a kids these days where Lyndon is like, he calls the computer. He's like, come on, baby, or something like that. And Katie's there and she's like, don't call the computer baby or whatever. And Lyndon's like, it's not his fault. He's from the generation that doesn't know any better. And then Stuart's really kind of pissy and like, what do you know? You don't know about anything. Have you ever listened to Coltrane? Like, you don't know shit. Like, just like really. And it's this really like aggressive kind of scene. And so that's happening. And honestly, that's why I came. Like, I came to the show to find out what this computer is. It's almost like the computer. It's like a ghost story. It's like, I saw the lady in black or the lady in white, and all I want to do is go back and learn more about the mystery that is that computer. And instead, I'm being pulled away by like all these red herrings, like the espionage or like Jamie, the kind of old boyfriend coming back trope. And I'm just like, no, I want to get back to what is the computer actually doing? Because that's what I want to know. And so I think sometimes people are like, Lily was kind of annoying in the films, or there's a lot of stuff on the internet about they didn't like her acting or whatever, and that could just be the internet, which is just shitty in general, especially for actors of different ilks. But I think it's more than that, because I think one of the reasons why the scenes are so frustrating with Lily is because, for me at least, they were taking me away from finding out what the machine did, which I thought was the most interesting thing. Because is it time travel? What is it? What is it doing? Is it predicting things? Like, what is it? And also, a lot of the Lily scenes were her figuring out stuff that we already knew. So we knew he's been murdered. We knew Sergei has been murdered. So anytime she's spending like trying to unravel the mystery, it's like, dude, we already know. And so we didn't know the thing about that he was involved with the Russians. So that's kind of new material. But there's even scenes with Jamie where she's like talking with Jamie and she's kept catching Jamie up onto the stuff that she learned that we already know. And to me, those scenes are so frustrating. And as we go on, these scenes more and more of these happen where I'm just kind of like, maybe the ordering of the episode could have been a little bit different so that I didn't spend like half the episode watching the characters figure out what I already knew, when really I want to learn about like, what is this computer doing in this dark room, and you know, who are these like mysterious characters that work in there? Because like at that point, Stuart and Lyndon, we've seen them in a few scenes, but we don't know anything about them. And they seem to just be very interesting, as well as Katie is in there in the computer as well. So yeah, these scenes are great and all. And I totally agree. I think people are like, wait, is this like a Tom Clancy type movie? But I was kind of like, I hope it's not, because I want to learn more about the computer. Like what is this thing?
Well, I think that some of the scenes, because I don't disagree that there's a lot of times we're hearing stuff that we already know. So you're right about that. But I think that's the reason it's necessary is because it has to set up why Jamie comes back into her life and is helpful, and things that will come later will not have the same emotional payoff if he just comes in, hacks the phone, and then leaves, and there's no anything else to it. Like, and reasonably after his first reaction to her, there has to be the reestablishing of this relationship. So I don't disagree that a lot of it is repeating what we already know, but I also think that it is necessary because, like you said, we're going to start getting character relationships, like you said, with Lyndon and Stuart, who when you first see them, you think they hate each other. And things change as it goes on. I mean, there's more that develops there. But as you said, we're in a room.
Even in the episode. It changes within the episode too.
And this is what happens. So we get this projection of apparently the crucifixion of Jesus. I guess that's what it looks like.
Which, by the way, so I'm sitting listening to Lily, like figuring stuff out I already know, and then for like 5 seconds or a very short period of time, maybe a minute and a half, I see that they're now showing the crucifixion of Christ. And even in this scene, they were squabbling, Stuart and Lyndon, and now Stuart puts his hand on Lyndon, and they're like, they have a new bond because they just witnessed, or we don't know what we're looking at, but they've just witnessed something that is short of a miracle.
Yeah, and then Forrest comes in, and they're talking about it, and he's like, okay, so, you know, is it an absolute, you know, is it getting it 100% or whatever phrase he uses? And they're like, well, no, you know, if you want to stick with using it this way, there might be some variation. He's like, no, it's all or nothing. Either it works or it doesn't. And until it works all the way, it doesn't work. And then he kicks them all out. And then he sits there and he calls up a projection of his daughter. So even though it doesn't really work, it works enough that he wants to see his daughter for a minute. So again, there's these little kind of wobbles or suggested wobbles to Forrest, like the morality conversation. This, where, well, is he as determined? Is he as dead set in his belief, in his worldview, as he says he is? Or is Katie the one who's really certain? Again, there's all these little suggestions of it that make you think maybe it's her. And so I think that's smart because there's so many things that make the audience not have certain footing. And I think that's where like the Russian stuff and all the rest of it is to keep you kind of not really sure where things are heading. Because, I mean, if it spelled it out right from the beginning, then the middle episodes would have no point. There's no tension. There's no suspense if you're certain of what's going on. And so I think that's what a lot of, and maybe for some people is frustrating. Maybe they think there's too much of it. I will see, because I haven't watched this since 2020. So I'm coming in basically fresh again. And so far, it's riveting. So I'll see if I find that there's too much of that. But I think this is all intentionally done to keep you off your balance. And so then,
yeah, because Stuart's like, we should be, you know, popping champagne. Like, we just saw the crucifixion of Christ. Like, this is amazing. And you're like, yeah, it was pretty good, like good enough to see. But for some reason, Forrest is like, no, it's his binary. We're thinking it's his binary thinking. It either works 100% or it doesn't. And he's so persistent about that. And then, just like you said, he waffles then. He goes, oh, you know what? You're right, Stuart. You should be, you know, popping champagne and have a bath. Like, you know, use the expense account or whatever. Like, so he does even then go back saying like, this is a success. Like, so even there in that scene, he like is like, no, if it's not 100%, then it's, you know, it's shit. And then in the same scene, he's like, oh, well, actually, it's pretty good. Like, great job. Now get out of here so I can watch my kid. Like, so very unstable, you know. And well, I think you're right.
I think that makes him I think his reaction is a real kind of personality type where he's infuriated at less than success, but then he's like, well, if I make them not want to work for me, they're never going to get there. So I have to back off a little bit, even though the first reaction was the true reaction. And then, like I said, then he looks at his daughter. So then we're basically at the end of the episode again. And we have this scene in a car garage because Kenton was observing. This is where he's like, God damn it. When he sees Lily talking to the Russian agent, it's like, again, it's just like, man, I wanted to watch the game tonight.
He happens to be at the park though, too. Like, so he must have been following her as well.
He's surveilling her. It's very, if the Russians can watch her, certainly, Kenton has said, because he has a sit down with Forrest, and he's like, yeah, I don't know if she's really going to get past it. Forrest is like, no, she'll get over it. It's just a reaction to it now. She'll get past it. And Kenton's like, I don't know, I'm not so sure. So of course he's actually watching and you have to imagine this is part of his frustration is this guy is so focused on the one thing that he's not seeing all the other stuff that's going on. So I'm going to have to do all this. And even though I'm warning him, he's not listening to me because all he's focused on is the one thing. He won't even buy a new car. He says to him at one point, he's like, you're just in the same little house with the same old car. Buy a new car, do something. And so now we get to the end of the episode and we see the Russian agent drive into a parking garage and Kenton comes in right behind him and they confront each other and they're having this conversation about, well, let's not bullshit each other. We'll just talk frankly. And of course they're not. And they immediately know they're not. And then it ends up being a fight scene in this garage, which is done with this music playing where we're cutting back to Lily and we see her going like across the room and going towards the furniture. So you think, okay, she's going to move the chair or is she deciding or what? And so then Kenton gets stabbed right away. And for a lot of the episode, when I first watched this, I thought he was going to get killed. I was like, oh, he's going to lose. They're going to kill this guy who we thought was the big threat. And it looks like he's losing most of the fight, and then he manages to get them both on the ground, where again, it looks like Anton has the upper hand on him, and then he pushes Anton's head against the tire and snaps his neck, which again, almost as disturbing as the guy setting himself on fire, because it's just so nakedly, it just happens. You just hear the sound.
Or being strangled with a plastic bag. Like, yeah, we've had some some intense...
Because there's no theatricality in death. It's just... It's the suffering and the misery of death is just right there. And there's no cutaways. Like his head turns and you hear this crack and then he's dead and that's it. And then the very end of it is we see Lily's putting a sign in the window that says fuck off to, you would assume, the Russian agents. And to basically that she wasn't going to do it. Whereas, again, the first time I watched it, because in 9 out of 10 shows like this, she would have moved the chair and gone, and decided to like see how far I can take this, see what they'll tell me. And then the episode ends right there. And, again, it's another great ending.
Yeah. It just kind of felt like, okay. Once again, I was like, okay, can we get back to like learning more about the computer? I did notice musically, it was this band called Low, and they're like a band from the 90s. And they started the episode, like we said, where we kind of saw two people fighting in a parking garage at the start or somewhere. And we were like, okay, so this has already happened or it's going to happen. And it was the band Low. I'm forgetting the name of the song, but it's always an odd
Conversation, I think, because they repeat that word. I think it's called Conversation because they keep saying that word. I have a feeling that's what it is.
Yeah, and it's always weird when in a series they pick a song that has vocals in it. And it always feels very like PR, like it always seems like IP, like the IP firm that owns the copyright to the song wants to make some money off streaming. Like, so like when I first heard it, I was like, oh, so it's going to be like that type of series where they have like featured music so that people can earn IP off the movie. Like, so I was like, oh, it's going to be that type of show. And there's a few other like sort of, already written songs from bands and stuff used, or sort of sound supervision, we might call it, when you use like a already written piece of music. But I didn't know if there's any significance to why at the start of the episode and then at the end that they used the song, and the sound supervisor was like, instead of using one of Ben's scores or anything from Jeff Barrow, to have that band Low, which I'm sure probably Garland, is maybe a fan of Low. I don't, but they would have been around his, time period, like coming up in the 90s and, being successful in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm always wary of when non-specific to the project music is used.
It can become like One Tree Hill, like very quickly, like a a drama. Yeah.
But this is where I fall back because number one, I think the scene that the music actually works very well as kind of a driving thing for the scene. I don't even care about the lyrics. I don't know whether they actually matter or not. I wonder if it was more about the sound. It could be because Garland's so specific in what he's doing that it doesn't feel like. I would hope that he'd be like, okay, if I have to use an original song, I'm going to come up with it because this is what fits for the scene. I don't know, but listening to the music over the lyrics, it has this very interesting feel to what we're seeing and what's going on and what the music is. So I agree, it's very dicey. When you have kind of, like Quentin Tarantino does it a lot, but he tends to do it correctly. But it can go really badly, badly.
Yeah, but that's a masterclass in sound supervision, the way he uses older music and newer music. And
Yes, but more often than not, it comes off as dated and silly, and it just sticks out, and it doesn't seem like it fits. So, yes, it's... Would I have liked to hear the actual composers of the rest of it do something? Sure, but... Then again, it did work. I felt like it was not overpowering the scene. It worked enough that I'm like, okay, this is maybe when it happens again, I won't feel the same way. We'll see what happens in the later episodes. But for this, I was like, okay, I like this because there's something, it has a very specific feeling to it. And yet it's sort of an ordinary song for these events, like a guy getting his neck broken in a garage. Like there is something fitting about the song to the scene.
It's more mature. The vocals are, the vocals once again have that sort of weight to them, like all the other vocals we've heard so far that seem somewhat strained or have this like kind of sacred kind of vibe to them. So even though it's just like singer-songwriter, it kind of sounds like there's only two members in the band Low. Mimi Parker, the lead vocalist, she has like an Emmylou Harris kind of like heavier kind of female vocal. So yeah, it adds that weight. Stylistically, it fits everything else that Ben has put in the score. But yeah, at first I was just like, oh, it's one of those shows where every week, whatever executive producer, whatever IP they own, whoever's catalog, if they bought Dylan's catalog, then there's going to be a Bob Dylan track later somewhere in the
the problem is it is often done badly. So you do have this expectation that when you hear it, you're like, oh no, here we go. We were doing so well with the soundtrack, and now starting with the end of episode 2, we're just going to start, when will Third Eye Blind or whoever show up, to punctuate a scene because, somebody said, oh, we can do, we're bringing the 90s back, man. That's a trend now, isn't it? It's like, oh, great. Here we go. When will Nickelback show up to start off an episode where somebody's getting his head cut off? It's
I don't know, man. I don't think I could. I might have not made it.
If that had happened, I wouldn't have hung with the show. I would have been like, no, I'm sorry. It's a bridge too far. I'm out. So, and that's the end of the second episode. So really, this is a set of, even with, as you said, some of the stuff where you're like, okay, let's get back to what's going on in the mystery room. 2 of the best kind of episodes in terms of, all right, I need to know what happens next. They really do sit, because there's still so much that and even just dangling the little thing with the crucifixion does make you sit there and go, what does this have to do with the nematode thing? Like, what is this? What does this machine do? Why are they going back and watching the crucifixion? Because again, that's a religious element in a show that's been dealing with heavy philosophy and big numbers. So what is going on here?
But it doesn't start. The show did start with Gregorian chant, which was religious music of the church sung by monks. So now I'm like, okay, like when I saw the crucifixion of the Christ, like the grainy thing, I was like, all right, how many ever episodes these are, and even if there is Nickelback here in like episode 7, I'm like, I will watch all the episodes because I was just like, I need to find out what's inside the machine.
And that I think is one of the things that I find so impressive about the show is it is so specifically architected, and the pacing, even with the weaker elements, it never gets to a point where you're disinterested. At least not yet, where you're like, I don't really need to know what's going on here. I'm kind of bored. Like I'm not connected. Like there's so much that you're seeing there going, and there's such strong, interesting personalities. Because even like you said, Lyndon and Stewart, who we barely get anything with, they're so well defined just in their little banter and the way that they react to their success, whatever percentage it is. It just works so well. And this is what I mean about shows generally don't feel like this. They don't feel this completely crafted top to bottom with a singular kind of approach and a vision and execution. So yeah, it's just for our first 2 episodes, it doesn't feel like they don't know where it's going. That's another thing too, is there's a sense that you can sometimes pick up with something like Lost, where at some point you're going, do you actually have an answer? Or are you just bringing up big questions because it's fun? You never get that sense from the show. It always seems like it is going somewhere.
Yeah. And with Lost and shows like that where there is a mystery, usually finding out the mystery, it's not as fun as being in that suspense. So they like drag it out as long as they can. And especially like in Lost, I always bring that up because it was this excruciating 22 episodes per season of stretch. And like you said, I don't think J.J. Abrams and the other writer had any idea what actually was on the island. But you're right. In this, I'm like, Garland knows what's coming up. And now on the second rewatch, like we've said in some of these scenes, I'm like, oh no, he's telling us. He told us. But we unfortunately have to watch the whole thing to know where it's going. And like we're doing now, you have to watch it a second time sometimes to appreciate it.
Yeah, and I do remember that Garland had said that this was meant to be a one and done series too, which I'm really happy about, because if this had been intended as some ongoing thing, then that's where they would have eventually said, oh, no, you can't resolve anything. We have to set up a second season. So the fact that, again, not to jump too far ahead, but this is a one and done. This has an ending. So you will get answers. Mm-hmm. Now, your reaction to them,
you'll know who killed Laura Palmer by the end. Yeah.
This will not drag on with no end goal. So, and that's all. I think that brings us to the end of the second episode. But it's a hell of a start to a really great show. And like I said, it is so clear that there is a vision of a creator that is consistent. And that's one thing about shows where people bounce around, is the consistency can be all over the place. And the fact that this has just this very, like, you never don't know where you are in terms of this world. Like, it's clear somebody has a handle on it and they know what they're doing. And that will get me through some of the weaker elements, but there's very few weak elements because the visuals are outstanding. The soundtrack is outstanding. And I feel like, again, I think the performances are great. I think they're doing what they're supposed to be doing for those characters. So I have no real complaints about the first 2 episodes whatsoever.
Yeah. And the world feels real. It feels real and consistent and real. And the people and the characters are believable.
And I guess that brings us to the end of it, because we've talked about the 2 episodes. And so that's episodes 1 and 2 of DEVS. And sadly, you can't get this physically anywhere. I've looked, so you will have to subscribe and stream it, which I think is a shame. I would really love a nice 4K of this thing, because, man, the visuals absolutely would be worth having it.
It's on Hulu. It is streaming on Hulu, and it is in 5.1 on Hulu. So you do get the nice sound there. It's not UHD or 4K, but
no. And I have a feeling that this was shot very well and would probably look great on 4K. So I hope at some point they will release it. Unfortunately, we're in a current time where physical media is tough to come by, but if a series ever really deserved it, this is one of them. I would love to see this in a really, really nice kind of set with extras and how they made it and behind the scenes. I'd love to see how some of this stuff was made. I really would. It'd be interesting to see how they crafted some of these scenes.
They actually built the computer. It exists.
I think they did build some part, like the middle part. I think it was actually built out of some kind of like steel and glass. I thought I read something about that. It wouldn't shock me if he had that thing built, because I mean, it's shot so well, it would make sense that you'd want the thing there for all the lighting and all that stuff.
It looks like the other supercomputers where most of that is just like cooling, like the actual chip is
the chip is the size of your thumbnail, and that's doing all the work, and everything else is just to take all the massive heat and bring all the electricity. Yeah, it could be. Mm-hmm. So once more, a reminder that Doug's current latest album is Music for Billionaires, and that The Process is the podcast he does, which is in season 6. And coming in the fall will be Electric Rodeo Revival. Sorry, I had to look off and read it again because I didn't remember.
It didn't seem like you were reading it at all. It felt very natural.
Was that natural? Yeah, it was that natural. Yeah, where I was going like this and accentuating each word with my head nodding. Yeah, I'm smooth, really good. Smooth. And so, Doug, thanks for doing this. This is a great series to talk about, and yeah, I'm looking forward to when we get to the middle. It's going to be interesting once they start really starting to delve out what's going on. But yeah, this is again this series had one of the best first episodes I can remember, And I feel like this is just something we don't get very often. I said that before, and I'll say it again. It's just not something we see very often. So I've loved talking about it. And I guess that's it. I never have an ending. So, again, it's on Hulu.
We'll continue to love it.
Yep. And again, I like this idea that we're not going to jump too far ahead. We'll certainly talk about things that, and rewatch the episodes, because after this, go back and some of this stuff, pay attention to it. And because it is interesting where some of the setup and payoffs happen. There is a lot of it where what seems like simple throwaway lines, they are absolutely not. There is a plan. It will be executed, and it will be done in a gorgeous presentation with wonderful soundtrack and music to it. So yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun with this. And on that note, everybody, thanks for listening, and go buy Doug's music and go listen to his podcast. Go watch DEVS, and we'll see you back here for the next episode where we'll cover episodes 3 and 4. Have a great night, everybody.